So, I'm making a film called Piombino, and I'll put my name. There it is. Let's begin. I just missed the 10:30 train to London King's Cross and had to catch the next one at 11 a.m, paying through the teeth as always for a new ticket. I'd been around enough trains in the last few months to know that there weren't many ticket inspectors about, and it was rare that you got your tickets checked. But my dad messaged me to say that I should buy a new one, as the fine was a lot more than the ticket. So in the end I agreed because he offered to pay. It was very generous of him. The station was a real mosh pit today. It was the hottest day of the year, and there were massive queues for tickets, so for a moment it looked as though I wouldn't even make the 11 o'clock train and then end up with 2 unused tickets. But anyway, here I am, 10 minutes later, hot and sweaty, trying to recompose myself, about to begin a feverish session of memoir writing.
We will call at Newcastle, Durham, Darlington, Northallerton, York, Doncaster, Newark Northgate, Peterborough, and London King's Cross.
Perhaps I should explain what's going on here. I'm on the train to London because I have a flight that leaves from there on Sunday, in 2 days' time, to Italy, where my mum is from and most of her family live. My main reason for making this film is to document Piombino, the town in Italy where my mother is from. Piombino is the real subject of this film. My mother was born there in 1963. She's the same age, funnily enough, as Michael Jordan. She grew up in Piombino and 2 of her siblings still live there. The town itself is a sort of post-industrial area of around 30,000 inhabitants, whose heyday was probably in the 60s or 70s, around the time when my mum was born, and the 2 main steel plants that employed much of the town were at their peak. The nearest big cities to Piombino are Pisa and Livorno, about 50 miles to the north. Perhaps, of course, you've heard of Pisa because of the tower. That's where my uncle and cousin live. I plan on visiting my cousin there next week and staying with him a few nights, so you'll be introduced to him over the course of the documentary. The train was now passing the English-Scottish border at the town of Berwick-upon-Tweed. After speaking to the inspector and checking the website, I realised there was little I could do and decided to embark on a literary bender, almost finishing part 1 of my memoirs. For a moment, I even considered popping open my portable DVD player and watching Pasolini's The Decameron. I had a few slices of soggy bread and some pâté in a plastic bag, but eventually decided against those as well. Oh yeah, for a moment it looked as though we would have Pasolini and pâté. The Lars von Trier and pâté is my usual combo.
Speak to our onboard team or text British Transport Police on 61016. We'll sort it. See it, say it, sort it.
Once I arrived in King's Cross, I thought it a good idea that I peruse some bookshops. The London Review of Books bookshop was nearby, and I wanted to see if they had any Pushkin collection editions, if you guys know what those are. King's Cross was also nearby, near to Highbury and Islington, home to much of London's metropolitan kind of elites, intelligentsia, if you will. I hope that their intellectual sensibilities, socialist leanings, and generous outlook on life would translate into some excellent charity shop finds at the Oxfams they have there. And damage had been sustained to the overhead cables in the Alexandra Palace area, and the train was at the back of what was a very long queue. In the end, the train was delayed for an hour, like I said, and which meant we wouldn't have time to go to the bookshops today. That was a little presumptuous of me, slightly preemptive, and we'll have to do that another time. I'm very sorry, fellas. I'm very sorry.
I do apologise for the inconvenience caused.
Eventually I made it home and I was very keen to show my family and tell them about this new project I'd started.
What are you doing, man? Are you pissing me off?
Questi shorts.
Well, listen, chap's got to be free. Stop taking the piss. Who's that for? Yeah, put that down now and have your supper.
He's gonna.
I'm being censored.
Duncan's gonna lose one. And
Duncan doesn't want people to find out.
Duncan's gonna go absolutely mad in Piombino when we fall him asleep.
Quando li facevate le foto, io ho tutte le foto di pure il telefonino, ma did I lose everything in iCloud?
Were you surrounded by people or was there space? Do they give distance between the chairs?
Fuck off.
There was, yeah, kind of one seat each. Go over.
Yeah, but this isn't how it works. You can't this is not how vlogging works. You can't create a scenario. I have to film a scenario.
Claim the money back then?
Claim what money back?
The ticket.
It was a pretty long-winded process. Got to do a photo.
That's fine.
More forms.
But if you didn't buy the ticket, you used that, would they have said something?
Did they check your ticket?
Yeah, they did. Which was unexpected. All that vigorous.
They always do.
Vigorously mopping up the sauce.
James, can you just fuck off?
Can we just eat?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm back home now. It's very hot today. It seems my family are not taking kindly to this new project that I've set out on. But I think they'll get used to it. So I'm not despairing at all. This is only the beginning. I think after 2 weeks I will have worn them down. The next day I packed my bags and saw a few friends, or as I like to put it, attended a few virtual chap summits. The first one of said chap summits was with my two friends, Aidan and Elias. Aidan lives in Canada and Elias lives in America. We would later be joined by our friend Kaya, who lives in Japan. But first, this is Aidan in action, giving us a little kind of mini essay on filmmaking, it would seem.
We underestimate how much. We're tempted to say, if I'm filming something, I'm intervening. And therefore, if I'm intervening, I'm somehow interrupting. Yet we struggle to think that intervention might somehow be itself a natural process. That our interventions are radically stimulating, in other words, to nature. Not interrupting. Or stimulating as interruptive, or stimulating as like cohabitational. Such as is happening right now, but
Aidan was normally talking or rifling on about Hegel and Kant. He has an unrelenting intensity that most people don't have, and that I really like about him. On this occasion he appeared a little more playful and toned down his usually very florid and, like I said, intense explanations of Hegel.
This is Luigi.
We'd all been apart since about February, and we were unsure when we'd next meet, so together on the group call we considered possible locations for our next rendezvous. Should we go? Why don't we do Mongolia? What is the technical halfway point? So the thing is, everyone could make an argument that they're the halfway point in this scenario. If we have UK, Japan, America, so whoever wants to be the biggest dick and say I'm not leaving. That's where we go. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I say we all go to Japan.
I reckon so too. I actually think so too. But this isn't Kaya's fault.
We can't go back to Britain because we've already been there.
I'm good,
Can't go to the States. Canada.
I can't go anywhere else.
I already live there, so I don't need to to come to Canada, but
Australia's an option. You got Australia.
But Japan's most interesting. I don't know, I've never been to Japan.
you guys South Africa.
South Africa's also an option, yeah. Japan would be great. Yeah, Japan would be great. It's just a little too local, yeah.
Is there somewhere in Japan? Is there somewhere in Japan you've never been to before that you think's a really crazy, weird place that you wouldn't otherwise visit?
Oh shit! Where should we go then? Like some deep forest with a cabin.
Oh my god!
Like a total Murakami, but
Like Murakami, it's just
Or you would love Naoshima, the island with the art sites. It's absolutely stunning.
Well, Naoshima it was then, but back in Ealing there were far more pressing concerns. As alluded to yesterday, my family, particularly my father, objected to my making of the film, going so far as to say that he would file a court injunction against me if I used any footage of him.
No, don't. No, go away.
He said, I quote, "The only thing I have to say about your film is I don't want to be in it, and if I'm in it, I'll be sending you a court injunction." He is a solicitor, and so happens to be a rather litigious individual. This is normal for him, and happens to be his way of doing things. My mother, on the other hand, was a little more encouraging, and I asked her whether she thought they might potentially screen my film at the Italian Institute in Belgravia, where she has a few friends and contacts. My father immediately dismissed the idea, saying, "They wouldn't show your shitty film at the Institute, son."
Ci riesco.
A dopo, yeah.
Vuoi andare da Argos a comprarti una valigia?
No, io sto bene.
Tutto bene?
Sì, tutto bene.
Dai, allora è questione di poche ore e poi si riparte.
Turn it off.
In his youth, my father was a dashing young man, but as you can probably tell from the way that he mindlessly wanders round his own open-plan kitchen, that middle age has been very hard on him, and he has aged considerably. He blames this, of course, on my brother and I, which is understandable, but still doesn't account for such dodgy short shorts. All I can say is that, Dad, if you're watching this, I look forward to receiving your court injunction. We set off the next day, early, at 6 a.m. It was a beautiful Sunday morning, and the sun was low and golden over the train tracks. Our plane was set to leave at 8:30, so we left with plenty of time. I was eager to start shooting some footage of Piombino and was ready to go.
Where are we going today?
It's 6:07. Put your camera away, possibly.
7+6 mean?
James, I'm going to break it if you don't. Just put it away now.
Chapter 2. The Arrival. On the flight back, I will make sure that I bust ahead of my brother when we get our tickets checked and secure the window seat, so that at least on the journey back I'll have some nice footage. Midway through the the flight, I looked over to my brother. The cunt wasn't even looking out the window. It was a waste of a good seat. Only a few hours later, we'd arrived in Pisa and were zooming along the motorway heading straight to Piombino. We had Franco Battiato booming out the speakers. It was a cracking day with clear skies. Life couldn't have been better. Ever since I was a kid, I've always loved the motorway tunnels that they have in these parts that shoot through the kind of thick scrub vegetation of the steep hills. We were nearly there, and what you can see now is the road into Piombino.
Cosa gli dico? Tra 5 minuti.
Yes.
McDonald's.
I reckon it's bouncing. Oh,
Bouncing McDonald's.
it's empty, basically.
Oh, here we go. This is the moment. This is the moment. This is it.
Entra.
Piombino.
Piombino, guarda, c'è qui.
Ah.
Tallone.
Ah, that says, dice enjoy Piombino.
Visto?
Once we unload the car, I'm going to get to go there.
Ah, guarda.
Just stop it. Makes it less dangerous.
Lavori in corso via Tagliatoro. Quindi qui ci sarà più traffico per noi. Vabbè, si sentirà meno.
Going to be a parkeggio.
Quindi questi girano senza mettere la freccia.
Nobody does the fridge business. Probably they can tell I'm a foreigner before I get out of the car because of the amount of indicating I do.
Ah, Piombino, the Piombino of my youth, my treasured childhood. I can faintly recall one summer's afternoon, many years ago, sat together on the marble steps of my grandmother's flat, dribbling gelato on my vest and shorts in a cretinous fashion, under the garden's single oblong cypress, opposite the patch of prickly pears and aloe. I turned to my dad and said, "Hey Dunks, did you bring any of my Playmobil with you?" And now, many years later, Piombino is still much the same. There is still the cypress, the smell of pines, the prickly pears, the scurrying of lucertole and geckos, and the dark green persiane shutters that keep out the beating sun in these rows of slits, and of course the constant racket of cicadas. Truth be told, we live by what is a rather busy road, and so the iconic sound of the cicadas are mostly drowned out by the revving engines of the swashbuckling youths who noisily drive their wretched motorinos up the street at every hour of the day. Until recently, though, before my late grandmother passed, the racket of the motorinos was in turn drowned out by an even greater noise, that of my said grandmother's booming TV speakers. She was, to put it politely, a little hard of hearing, and so had to have these special speakers which she turned up to full volume when she was watching TV. The speakers were so powerful and the sound travelled so far that legend has it you could tell what program she was watching from 3 blocks away. What's more remarkable is that in the midst of all this chaos, we have nuns for neighbours. Believe it or not, there is a quaint little nunnery that our garden backs onto. I have no clue how these poor nuns cope with all the commotion.
Allora, che facciamo? Jimmy, siamo arrivati a casa. Te cosa vuoi fare? Si va a fare un bel bagnetto al mare, prendiamo la sicura. Facciamo le valigie dopo.
With regards to our sleeping quarters, we stay in 3 rooms that are part of a larger building, which was built by my grandfather and his father. This is yet another tale that I hope to effortlessly weave into the account of our family history. But as I was saying, 3 rooms. At the back there, with the yellow light, is my parents' bedroom. Then there is a small bathroom to the right, and this main room is the kitchen/living room/ my brother and I's bedroom. The couch I'm sitting on right now folds out into a bed that my brother and I have to share. It's all very incestuous.
Allora.
Having a nice... Oh. Well, anyway, that's the flat we stay in. The general consensus on the day was that we headed to the beach, so that was where we went. The sun was out, and you could see flamingos out of the window. In the car there, everyone seemed very happy, and we were all relieved to finally be in Piombino.
Mamma said pinguini.
Struzzi?
Pinguini.
Fenicotteri, no? Cosa sono i struzzi?
Gli struzzi sono ostrich, non sono gli struzzi.
In the following scene, I would like you to take note of how peaceful and calm everyone is.
Quanti volete stare?
Fino all'ultimo. Oh, I don't know. What time is it now, man?
I believe it was I who once said, "Ow."
What time is it?
What?
What time is it? It's 2.
Beach time.
Right, you just pay till 8, no?
Biglietto ticket.
Io provo, ma c'ho 4 euro.
4 euro?
Dovrei avere 5 euro, vediamo dai.
Quanto costa il parcheggio?
Infatti, that's why we want to find this reduction.
No. I apologize in advance, but I have no video footage for what I am about to tell you. Fact is, I am a literary man, and this is my first attempt at filmmaking. So if you could, please sit back, relax, close your eyes, and consider this next bit as an audiobook of sorts. So, as I hope you noted, things were very calm. A few moments later, though, by some immense stroke of misfortune, the parking ticket fell down a slot in a nook of the car. We surgically pulled out a number of receipts stuck under the window from previous days in an attempt to retrieve it, and spent maybe 10 minutes in this fashion, but it proved irretrievable. My dad would simply have to buy a new one. It's not fair, he said, all day. I can't fucking believe it. It might be hard to understand, but like I've said a number of times now, my dad can become extremely agitated and angry, and today was turning out to be a very tough day for him. I couldn't film anything, because I knew it would make things a lot worse, and it's possible that he would have tried to hit me. But anyway, he finally accepted that he would buy a new ticket. It was €5, 3 bob, which was not ideal, but not a big deal either. We got the ticket, and we're all good to go. But just then, as we were about to set off to our favourite beach spot, my dad was dealt an even bigger blow. Giulio, my brother, was negligent enough to have left the bag with all the asciugamani, that is towels, back at the house. I can't put into words the meltdown my dad was thrown into because of this news. You fucking pillock, he said. What were you bloody doing all morning? You sat around. Well, you had one thing to do. I went to the shops, I packed everything. Well, you just sat on the toilet. This was a reference to my brother Giulio's constant use of the toilet. The frantic energy in the car at the time was what I imagine it was like to be on the last chopper out of Vietnam. I feared for my own safety and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Even by my father's standards, this behaviour was unusual. It all culminated with him throwing his wallet, an umbrella, and my brother, overarm, in a kind of rabid baseball pitch. It was violent and unpredictable. I'll show you now what footage I have. Like I said, it was a domestic war zone, and I was seeking refuge behind a couple of Fiats, surreptitiously filming the spectacle.
My stuff is in there! Where?
You will have noticed 2 things in the clip. 1, that it was all very windswept, and 2, that my brother was standing a good distance away from my dad. This was so that he could jump out of the way if my dad threw something at him or made a sudden charge. In the aftermath, I discussed the episode with my mother. She said that I might have to end the film for the sake of my dad's health. I also spoke to my dad afterwards, and it transpired that he was very stressed with work. I've lost the last 2 jobs, he said, and if I don't get the next one, I think they're going to shoot me. By shoot, he meant fired, I assume. As far as I know, they don't have any firing squads in Blackfriars. Though it certainly appears that this was his breaking point. He is, after all, the breadwinner of our family. It wouldn't exist without him. He keeps the whole thing running. He is a mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell/family unit, to borrow a term from the AQA GCSE biology syllabus. Maybe this was a sign that my brother and I needed to pull our fingers out our asses after all, as he put it, and help out a bit. But then again, it's important to remember that it's towels we're talking about here. Asciugamani. That we'd only forgotten some towels. We would survive without them. I was, in fact, prudent enough to have packed my own one in my rucksack, so the whole asciugamani scandal didn't affect me at all. It really wasn't a problem for me. We would be joining my zio Roberto and my zia Tiziana at our usual spot on the beach, Murtelliccio, the same place we'd been coming to every summer of my life. It was their son, my cousin Andrea, that I was going to visit in Pisa on Thursday. So can I keep making the film? I'll turn it down, I'll make sure you... I won't film him at all, I'll film... Sì, certo, sì, certo.
Ma la cosa importante è che te...
Ma perché pensi che si è arrabbiato così tanto?
Con Giulio, che si è dimenticato...
Because he was taking so many shits this morning.
No, ma si arrabbiano tutti, non lo vedi?
That's my Uncle Robert, and that's my Aunt Tiziana. And this is Robert's aquiline side profile against a Mediterranean backdrop. The constant rustling of the wind that you can hear was a sure sign that a storm was coming, and only an hour or so later it began to rain, forcing us to leave the beach and head for the hills. Back when we were still at the beach, I'd noticed my Uncle Robert, who is a professor of developmental biology, had a massive textbook with him, which he told me he was reading for some research he was doing on autism. I told him I was fascinated by autism, though struggled to explain the nuances of my interest in the matter. Before long, we descended the steep slopes of the Maremma foothills and were in the village of Monteverdi.
Capito? 2 o 3 anni stanno.
Prendiamo anche un pezzettino di questo.
We soon found ourselves in a renowned delicatessen run by the charismatic Mucci brothers. These madmen had larders full of sheep's cheese and wild boar.
Dio delle rose, ma te sei il nostro cliente! Assaggia un po' di prosciutto buono!
Sei già assaggiato tutto.
Ma un po' di hascio buono!
Infatti se era venuto.
Via un po' di hascio che te lo faccio assaggiare!
No, sei già assaggiato.
Ah!
Ce lo devo dire.
Allora devi venire giù con me allora!
Il quarto salumi c'ha già.
Ah, già fatto mio fratello!
Lo metto.
Dove vieni, vedi?
10 euro, professore?
Ma che ne so?
They were convincing salesmen who exhibited great showmanship, shouting and gesticulating in a wild attempt to peddle as much pecorino as possible.
Pecorino di grotta! Siete sicuri me l'hanno fatta assaggiare tutto e qualcuno se ne sono scordati?
Allora, ascolta.
Dillo! Ma io te lo faccio riassaggiare, ma vieni qua, ma vieni! Tanto se te lo faccio assaggiare io, tanto con quell'altro non sono buoni! Sta fermo lì, stai fermo, vieni qua da me, vieni! Allora, pecorino fresco, vai! Lui per non ammazza nemmeno sotto tortura, vedo, e lo viaggia,
È sempre in giro?
Sì, ogni tanto va a destra, ogni tanto va a sinistra. Poi insomma viaggia, sta viaggiando, per ora viaggia.
Vai.
Allora io ti ho dato questo dolce e questo medio.
Vai,
va bene?
andiamo.
Vuoi che te lo metta nel sottovoto o lo mangiate subito?
Ma no, questo lo lascio tu.
E allora lo fate fuori subito, penso sia la miglior sottovoto.
Vai.
La migliore manutenzione è mangiarlo. Attenti alla testa, Buonasera. Ciao, buonasera. Vai, vuoi?
E mezzo, allora vai aperto. Secondo me sì, perché Carlo ce l'ha un minuto.
Dio buono signora, come ha fatto lei ad andare a Londra?
Allora io ho cercato lavoro a Cambridge, ho abitato in Irlanda.
Cos'è dottoressa?
Dottoressa, traducevo io.
Dio delle rolle, allora devo dire che la testa perché è anche difficile nel senso.
No, ma lui è il professore di famiglia.
Professore lei?
Universitario. Tu lo vedi però diresti. Professore universitario, biologo.
Ha delle rose, allora lei viaggia.
Sì,
Ma qui ci sa la crema di pizza. Qui abbiamo la crema di pizza, qui abbiamo la
crema di porcetti.
E tra la crema ci si mischia. Scusami, vieni qua.
Quella di Monteverdi è meglio.
No, è meglio la sua.
Che noi usiamo pisani.
Siete dove? San Vincenzo, dove ha detto Piombino, appunto.
Vai.
Paiolo, scusami, se la prendi questa via affettata, avresti speso questa cifra,
Vai.
Se torna lei, professore, qui non mi torna più nessuno.
Dai.
Professore, deve tornare, professore, gli voglio bene, professore. Viva il professore, viva la libertà. Sì.
Hai da fatto.
So those are the Mucci brothers, and it would appear my uncle ended up paying a handsome sum for their cheeses. It was in a village not too different from this one, where our guy Giovacchino Vignali would have lived, and it is at this stage that I would like to resume the family history. So, if you will, allow me to guide you along the amazing slopes of time back to the turn of the 19th century, where my great-grandfather, Michele Vignali, and his brothers, Guglielmo and Emilio, were making plans to leave the village of Castelnuovo Val di Cecina in search of work. The youngest of the three brothers, Guglielmo, emigrated to Uniontown, Pennsylvania, where we still have distant relatives to this day. Meanwhile, Michele and his older brother Egidio made the move to Piombino, where they hoped to find employment either in steel plants or as construction workers. Michele was 23 at the time when he moved with his young family to Piombino. My great-aunt Perla was born around the time they moved, whilst my grandfather Egidio was born in 1914 in Piombino in a house that we'll visit later in the documentary.
I mean, I know that Francesca and Michele married in 1910, and then in 1911 they had a daughter called Perla. And my father was born 3 years later, on the 15th of November 1914.
But in 1914, when did he have to... Wasn't he in the army, you said? Michele?
He had to go, Michele had to leave. He had to leave. He probably had already done his military service, but he had to go to the war. When the First World War broke out, he...
So soon after Elio was born, or before he was born?
Soon after, I mean, like in 1916, Italy intervened in 1915. My grandfather went as soon as the war started, I think. And I think he was 2 years in the war and then he was injured. But my father was very young, so very small, yeah.
Okay.
So Francesca was really worried that he would die.
But he made it.
Yeah, he made it, but he was injured. He had like a kind of bullet near his heart.
Really?
Yeah.
For his whole life?
He had this bullet, sempre.
Wow.
A kind of bullet or a shrapnel.
Oh yeah, shrapnel,
yeah. And so he had to be, he was in a military hospital in the mountains, in Trentino, somewhere there, where the war was happening. And he was a sapper, so he was building trenches.
Oh yeah.
So he was sent all over the trench lines so in different areas of northern Italy. And written by him. Also, he was surrounded by the Austrians one time, but he managed to escape, and some of his the people who were with him, some other Tuscan men, were actually made prisoners and killed. So he was very lucky because he returned. He came back home.
Okay. And then, what do we know about Nonna Francesca then?
Nonna Francesca and Michele were from the same village.
So they just met in the village?
And they met at the village, and there was 2 years difference. Francesca was 2 years younger than him, and they got married when she was 21, and he was 23.
Chapter 3, Present-day Piombino. So it was Irio and Michele who built the house we're staying in, and many years later, after its construction, I woke up in the very same building to find this next to me. It is about time, I think, that I finally show you the town of Piombino. Our first excursion into it will be this evening, a kind of nighttime reconnaissance. Andiamo! Ce l'abbiamo fatta! This is the... As much as Piombino has a reputation for being a bit of a ghost town, things can get lively on summer nights such as this one.
This is why we don't give you a camera.
Hit us with a good idiom.
22, we're saying get your dick out.
Richard, give us a good idiom.
No.
Oh, come on. 4 in the morning, we're in Magaluf.
James, put your camera away, you're not funny.
Piombino's premier hotel. Albergo. We were heading into town to catch a glimpse of the David Bowie cover band that was playing at the Porticciolo, and I was hoping to show you some of Piombino's many sights en route. And so this is my brother, strutting the streets of Piombino, swaggering down Corso Italia. There was the cinema. Then there is Piazza Padella, which was until recently the world's smallest square, when it was beaten by a similarly pointless square in Germany. Then there's the medieval harbour, the Porticciolo, and then perhaps Piombino's most famous landmark, Piazza Bovio, which is a square that juts out into the sea. Even if you were to see Piombino in full daylight, there are few things that capture its essence better than a David Bowie cover band playing the headline slot on a Saturday evening.
How many seconds till of the moon you need?
The force that through the green fuse drives the flame. I feel the audio in that last shot there epitomised the making of the film, and perhaps my life more generally. Here I was, an alienated bard, unsuccessfully trying to put words to the mystical beauty of the universe, only to be repeatedly interrupted by some ghoulish bumpkin. However, now that I am back home, us aesthetes can be afforded the pleasure of completing the recital in peace.
I am the force that through the green fuse drives the flower. The force that through the green fuse drives the flower drives my green age.
Bah, superb. It must be said, the first night in Piombino was a blur. It amounted to little less than a hallucinatory fever dream of sorts, characterised by a shaky camera and an irritated brother. Flâneur, a man who saunters around observing society. Flâneur is a French noun referring to a person, literally meaning stroller, lounger, saunterer or loafer, but with some nuanced additional meanings. Flânerie, for example, is the act of strolling, with all its accompanying associations. Traditionally depicted as male, a flâneur is an ambivalent figure of urban affluence and modernity, representing the ability to wander detached from society with no other purpose than to be an acute observer of industrialised contemporary life. The flâneur was, first of all, a literary type from 19th century France essential to any picture of the streets of Paris. It was Walter Benjamin, drawing on the poetry of Charles Baudelaire, who made this figure the object of scholarly interest in the 20th century, as an emblematic archetype of urban, modern, even modernist experience. Following Benjamin, the flâneur has become an important symbol for scholars, artists, and writers such as myself. The classic French female counterpart is the passante, dating to the works of the great Marcel Proust, though a 21st century academic coinage is flâneuse. I myself like to think that I join a tradition of great British psychogeographers, from Ian Sinclair to Will Self, who is undoubtedly one of the better-known contemporary proponents of psychogeography.
Sadly, it does. What I'm hearing from you is an enthusiastic new Donatian identity. But it seems very much to be made up. I mean, you've obviously got a sort of flaneur's sensibility that you're now applying to outer London.
In the clip, Will Self was of course referring to donut or Donatian in what were strictly psychogeographic terms. But if we are to use donut in its more conventional, pejorative way, I would like to say one thing, that if there is anyone who could make a claim to being more of a pseudo-intellectual donut than myself, it is most definitely Will Self. On this occasion, my mother was struggling to get to grips with a camcorder, so we have limited footage of me in action. Though I will have you know that today I walked from this end of the bay to that end.
Grazie mamma. È bianco, no? Bianco cosa vuol dire?
Now, there is a very important person I would like to introduce to you. I should have already explained this by now, but my mother has 3 siblings. A younger sister, my Aunt Antonella, and 2 older brothers, one of whom you have already met, my Uncle Roberto that is, and the other brother is the person I would like you to meet. He is Sio Stefano, one of the funniest people I know, a natural comedian, exceptionally birbante, and typically the chief raconteur at family gatherings such as this one.
Maremma zuccona di sopra di sopra. E sono tutte a ridere. E sono sceso, sono andato, mi scusi di si figuri, non è certo il primo, fra virgolette parentesi, scemo, che si diventa di pagare, insomma, poi guarda, io meno male c'era la mascherina nemmeno prima, cappella in mascherina, insomma ti riconoscevano giù, che rossi. Chi me l'ha dato? No.
Mi ha presentato
British Passport.
Tutti sono rimasti? Davvero?
Ci vuole un muso per andare da questo lì. Comunque vabbè, non trovo la fotografia, però uno dei maggiori successi della mia vita è andare all'Ikea, girare tutta l'Ikea, starci delle ore e poi un'uscita senza acquisti. Una volta.
In a strange turn of events, my uncle Stefano proved to be rather camera shy when I asked him to tell one of his famous jokes. Instead, it was my mother of all people who appeared to have ingested the clown pill on this occasion.
Arriva la signorina al bar, comincia a guardare qua e là.
Allora si cammina, io e loro, no, siamo venuti a trovare in Irlanda.
E lì, e poi la famosa frase di mamma.
Babbo si accorge, esatto. Babbo, il presidente, così. E Babbo. Non lo conoscessi. Poi c'aveva una Babbo qua. Se arrivederci, insomma, tante cose. Poi l'Irlanda, sì, certo, come la Sardegna. Poi Babbo disse che era stato in Sardegna, la guerra.
What is?
C'era palesa. Who is that man? Cazzo è? Dopo 10 minuti a anche 15. Chi era questo? Insomma, guarda, le cose. Dovete mettere un like. Ma io non voglio essere.
At this point in the film, I must confess to have omitted what was a very crucial detail in the family history. You see, my zio Stefano, pictured here perusing his phone through a pendulous set of specs, nipple awry, was born under a very curious set of circumstances. What if I were to tell you that my zio Stefano and Roberto's real names were Robert and Stephen, and that they were born in Tadley, Hampshire?
Ma potrebbe essere un delinquente.
Ma lui è un delinquente.
What the bloody hell's going on here, you might say to yourself. It would appear the Vignalis have been shuttling between Piombino and the home counties on a generational basis. Well, this rather conveniently ties the whole film together, and is one of the biggest revelations in our family history. Remember earlier, you saw the video of my grandmother. Perhaps you imagined her as one of those little old Italian grannies. Well, listen to this.
Then I used to like Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers.
Britain I love every field and hedgerow.
Millicent Edith Blake, known variously in Piombino as Stritolina, Nonna Millie, or the English lady, was a true Middle Englander and proud matriarch of the Vignali family. Never one to complain, she lived through a world war, a serious car accident, and raised 4 children in a foreign country in what can only be described as a truly eventful life. Every year, for her birthday, my uncles would go to the nearby and much-loved patisserie, Biondi's, and request the same personalised mille-feuille cake with Nonna Millie's nickname Stritolina emblazoned across it. The footage presented to you here is of one such occasion in the early 2000s.
Soffia!
sia.
38.
Sia.
Violai, Milli, quanti anni? Domande non fare, bugie non dire.
Esatto, quasi la risposta stamani. Come vanno questi 25 anni? Non fare domande, non dire bugie.
A me mi risposi, dice domande non fare, bugie non dire. Rimasi questa veloce.
Cosa c'è scritto, mamma?
Well, you bet. I'll go to Struzolina. Somebody's taking another photo. Shall I take that one out?
Ora ci si mette.
Io non chi è qui, quello bello, no, mi sembra più lui.
What did they say at the shop when you said to Ryan Struzolina that they thought it was completely bomb?
Questo.
Sì.
Cosa?
Sembra.
Struzolina.
Chapter 4. Peasant Escapade. The next morning, I waved goodbye to my mother as my train set off, bound for Pisa, where I'd be seeing my cousin Andrea. It was a pleasant summer's morning as I waited apprehensively at Pisa's train station. I scanned the square in search of my cousin's familiar face. Soon enough, he arrived and I rushed over to him.
Come va?
I'm destroyed.
Anch'io un pochino, noi stavamo bevendo un po' ieri sera.
Ah sì?
Ci hanno portato dei vini buoni, il piccione. E te cosa facevi?
Io ero a una festa, a questo festival e ok, va bene, la ringrazio, sì, e dopo, ciao. Ok, Jimmy, allora a mezzogiorno e mezzo bisogna andare, mi vado a far vedere.
Va bene, ok.
Scusami, ma
Nessun problema.
non so che dirti.
Sto facendo il
mio culo.
Il culo.
The previous day, Andrea had brought a new exercise mat, and over the course of some vigorous exercise, he'd injured his ass. He was worried his coccyx might be inflamed, as pus had been coming out of his back. So, when I arrived, he was clearly a little preoccupied and caught up with all of this. He'd been on the phone with La Dottoressa, that's his GP, and was now at his appointment. All of this gave me some time to myself, so I made myself comfortable. After all, I felt rather at home amongst these fine volumes of Montale, Calvino, and Brothers Grimm. A few hours later, my cousin came back, healthy and in one piece. Fortunately, it transpired that it was not infected and would heal on its own.
Boom! Boom!
Tutti i muscoli del corpo.
Addio.
Ti è mai successo di battere contro un'altra macchina?
Specchietti, certo. Qui in questo pezzo qui.
O contro un'altra macchina che viene dall'altra parte?
Mai. Ti faccio sentire un altro pezzo.
Di chi? Di Franco Batti? Ah, va bene, del tuo gruppo.
Un gruppo, un pezzo che non
Nuovo?
è ancora uscito.
Pezzo nuovo?
Sì. Non è ancora uscito.
Un premiere per...
Premiere, sì.
Ora.
Nanni Moretti's 1993 film Caro Diario begins with the iconic scene of Moretti riding his Vespa through the streets of Rome on a hot summer's day with a freaky electro-pop score. Just as my cousin started playing his band's new music, a Vespa pulled out in front of us, and in a moment of great serendipity and quick thinking, I found myself filming a very budget remake of Caro Diario.
Sai quel Caro Diario? L'inizio del film segue uno in motorino.
Ah sì?
Sì, sì, i primi 5 minuti erano che... Ah, però questo gira, peccato, gira.
Ah, giro.
Mi sentivo come Nanni Moretti, come secondo me.
So this was the place, a vineyard nestled between rolling cypress-topped hills. My cousin's friend Daniele, an eminent sound technician, was the most heavily involved with the organisation of the festival. Meanwhile, my cousin was mainly focused on setting up a photography exhibition for his joint art collective, Lumen. I gave him a hand hanging the panelled photos that had fallen from their wire the night previously.
Vabbè, porta il cellulare con me, però. Oh, Dio. Ora mi sdraio. Ora mi sdraio, mi rilasso un po'.
Ah, questo è tuo.
Che stai cercando il tuo telefono?
Il mio telefono mi sa che è qui. No. Il mio telefono.
Things started to get garrulous when Mattia arrived, a friend of Andrea's who was a formidable chap and a key figure in the Lumen collective.
Non puoi stare a sedere, così va bene, però se ti facciamo mettere un po' indietro, appoggi il coccyge.
Andrea was busy bringing him up to date on his busted coccyx, when Mattia made a particular point of the pinned photos.
Ma questi l'hai messi tutti perché il vento sta facendo i danni?
Sì, che abbiamo cominciato
erano tutti per terra quando siamo arrivati.
No, tutti per terra, ne era resistito uno.
Riprendi proprio questo. Ieri sera li leviamoli.
The festival took on the feel of a carnival when a spontaneous performance piece began just next to where we set the photos up. On a related note, I would like to draw attention to the stalwart vecchietto, a staple feature at such events, on the right-hand side of the screens. A recumbent old boy, a smile on his face was a sure sign that he was comfy and having a good time.
Ti sei rotto il culo?
Mi sono rotto il culo, ovviamente. No, mi sono rotto il culo, però me lo sono brasato.
All the while, the performance piece grew increasingly bizarre. We soon realized it was decidedly nonsensical and impossible to follow. Moments later, a metaphysical pesticide wiped out the performers, signaling the death of the dancing butterflies. A bit of background on the upcoming clip. So during the week I was staying with my cousin Andrea, he'd recently decided that he wanted to bulk, put on some weight, and so had begun a course of high-carb meals on the advice of a nutritionist friend of his.
Padre non mentre mangia, questo è it's paper.
Perché non mangi delle caramelline? Dei bomboloni? Devi andare da Biondi, sai?
Calbo.
Ma non pensi che Biondi ha un pochino di carbo?
Non quanto questo, certo, Biondi è più buono.
È anche più... Oh, Giulio tipo Duncan, Michela, sai come si ringraziano? Vanno da Biondi.
No.
Vanno da Biondi.
Tutte le mattine.
Tutte le mattine.
Sta te. Bignè cioccolato.
Cosa di c'è?
La sua. Facendo video della vacanza.
Sì, no, di Piombino. Di Piombino.
Metti su YouTube?
Non so, c'è uno... sto pensando, sto figure out, devo pensare chi lo do. Devo trovare qualcuno. Forse l'istituto. No. Ma è finito? Com'è? Ma questo è...
Soon, night fell, turning the festival into a magical pleasure island, like Pinocchio's land of toys. I was ready to propel myself into intellectual debauchery at the slightest opportunity, and the chance arose for armchair philosophy the moment Mattia described himself as a self-proclaimed Kantian.
Spero di ora sulla telecamera, ma sbaglio sicuro. Però dice una cosa del genere, che comunque i vili, no, verranno... la storia si nutrirà del sangue Dio buono, come diceva, perché è proprio molto grafica la messaggia, però non mi viene. La storia
dei vinti o dei vincitori? Alla fine si divide in
spremerà il frantoio della storia, spremerà fuori il sangue dei vili, una cosa del genere. Come a dire, sì, una cosa del genere, però è bellissima questa cosa del frantoio, no? Che è proprio veramente, è veramente proprio... la storia comunque va avanti, l'umanità progredisce e chi comunque cerca di far tornare indietro un po', diciamo, l'umanità, il progresso, arrestare il progresso, comunque poi la storia avrà la meglio su di lui e movimenti come sovranisti, populisti, sì, forse ci possono fare dei passi indietro ora, ma alla lunga, cioè,
va bene questo a me. Cioè, veramente. Ma poi si erano proprio, andavano nei pub, bevevano, appena sentivano qualcosa, ballando insieme, uscivano tutti insieme. C'era un pub accanto al Parlamento.
The night continued in a similarly sentimental and playful mood, until 2ish, when the festival drew to a close, and we headed back towards the car park.
È stato anche colpo di Stato, poi non c'è.
Il finto colpo, cioè...
No, il finto.
Buono.
The next day we woke up late. The summer's heat made me lazy, and I did little more than nap that afternoon. Contemplating life in the cool bathroom, I got thinking about the film. As improbable as the screening at the Institute was, I had high hopes for Piombino, envisaging it as a potential touchstone in Anglo-Italian relations. The next evening at the festival promised to be pretty similar to the last one, only this time my cousin had a funny drone with him, as he'd been commissioned to shoot some footage of the festival's location. Other than this, everything else began to feel rather routine, and strolling back through the glittering olive groves after a fine supper of papa al pomodoro, I looked out at the shining firmament and thought to myself, 3 years ago, when I dropped out of medical school, I saw my actions as those of a prodigal son, actions that initially appeared foolish and wasteful, but in the long run would prove wise and pay dividends. I thought I knew myself and what was right, but since then, in the moments where I doubt myself and sense that there is no break to be forward, no great moment of redemption awaiting, I look back and think that maybe I was incurably stupid all along. The opening lines of Dante's Inferno, Tuscany's finest literary export, channel a similar predicament, where the narrator, halfway through an alien life, finds himself at a loss, unable to find his way, the right way, the path back to salvation. I would be lying if I made it out the scene that you could turn your life around by reading Dante. Only Proust can do that. The main thing I took from reading Dante was that I needed to get myself one of those droopy cardinal condom jobs he had over his head. I'm of the opinion that Petrarca wore it best, but who's to say? My own dress sense was called into question that second evening in Lucca. I was kitted out in what I thought was a tasteful Parisian red stripy top. It's actually one of my favourite shirts. When Andrea's friend Massimo, who I hadn't seen in over a year, had this to say the moment he saw me.
Ma perché quell'altro, cioè, perché sei rintintinte? Cioè, ti manca il cane.
Come si chiama una felpa? Non ho portato una felpa.
Devi mettere accanto a mio padre oggi eri uguale, cioè.
Davvero, è Tintin.
Senza maglia. Che stai? Aspetta, mi metto il lato migliore.
Raffreddore?
No, ma che raffreddore? Ah, Vischelle, per un film, che film è?
Si tratta di Piombino.
Ah, ma qui non siamo a Piombino. Ma qui siamo a Lucca.
In una vigna per giunta.
È una vigna di Lucca. A Piombino?
Sì, sì.
Allora ragazzo?
Siamo qui. Si annoia.
Infatti domani vi porto le carte, vi porto.
Bravo.
Carte.
Dai, un bel
Ora, però vi siete messi qua, ok? Forse
Dai,
qua
però
è il meglio.
noia in un posto bello.
Sì.
Ok.
Era bello, esorciavolo.
Boh, bellissimo.
Sì.
Sì.
Bravo, cioè. Fa delle cose.
Un artista, sì.
Questo è bello. Vedi, questa è una vite vecchia, no? La classica vite che crolla e che non crolla mai, no? Questa è di un artista catalano, Mudussier, praticamente ha ripreso la vite come elemento principale della vita quotidiana delle persone.
Con l'Atalanta si scoprirà appena si va intorno nella civiltà.
Serio.
A bigger group of Andrea's friends came that evening, and there was some major hubbub on the way back to the car park.
Sì. Cazzo fai?
Hola. Hola. How goes?
Buongiorno.
Buongiorno.
Via sta telecamera.
Paparazzi. Sono un paparazzo.
Mazza. Ancora
Ma
non
sì,
so
sei una star. Devi... Dio, vai piano.
Ancora non sono diventato famoso, già mi fa un video?
Sì.
Pronto?
Siamo partiti ora da San Martino.
Vai, ok.
I pancakes, le mandorle, devo prendere un frutto, il caffè, cioè è lunga la cosa,
Sì, cioè io non lo vedo così tanto.
Poi anche il pranzo, primo, secondo. La
Vabbè, magari per te no, per me è tutto
Sì, vabbè, ma ci metto il doppio del tempo per fare tutto, per cucinare e per mangiare.
Sì, sì. Dai,
E te invece Massimo mangi veloce?
Io sì.
Come lo spolveri?
Sì, c'ho questo problema, infatti non fa tanto bene. Io mangio molto velocemente, certo me le godo un pochino le cose, però non al 100% come uno dovrebbe.
Siamo pronti a comprare dei meloni, coconi?
Compriamo
6 meloni.
100 meloni.
Cioè.
Andiamo.
The magical place in the mountains, described by Andrea and Massimo, was not San Giuliano, but rather a small village in the Apennines, where Massimo's family had a house. A group of 15 of them were going there in a couple days, and I joined them as they hoarded food and wine for the various garrulous chap summit meals they had planned there. Massimo, of course, took on a lead role in the decision-making, but soon tempers began to fray. The boys were already in excess of their €150 budget when Massimo insisted they buy 5 bags of the big gocciolone cookies. I would be leaving Pisa and returning to Piombino the day before Andrea and his friends were headed to the mountains. In the interim, Andrea and I would spend another few nights together, cruising the streets of various communes north of Pisa.
Siamo alla stazione dei Rigoli. Ah, stazione ferroviaria. Sì, la stazione ferroviaria con 2 binari, però non ci fa mai nessuno.
Now, it may come as a surprise to you, but this suspicious-looking JPEG file provides us with the perfect segue between Pisa and Piombino. If you look closely at the photo, which was taken in Pisa, you will see that the street is called Carlo Marx Street. Within 100 meters of this sign, there is the main road, Lenin Road, and another smaller side street, Che Guevara Street. As far as Italian street naming goes, this isn't even exceptional, and Piombino too has its own Piazza Antonio Gramsci.
In my view,
they should all be made to pay a special 80 pence in the pound tax, a tax on being insufferably left-wing.
Nor is this practice unique to socialist figures. The futurist and nationalist poets, Marinetti and D'Annunzio, have streets and squares named after them all over the country. Even the obscure esoteric super-fascist, Julius Evola, has his own little street named after him. I sense, however, that things could get a little dicey if we follow this political tangent much further. So let us return to Piombino, where we were about to begin a tour of the town, led by Italy's answer to Jerry Garcia, Piombino's own sideshow Bob, Piombino native and amateur historian, my mum.
Quindi questo è l'edificio dove sono nata, dove siamo nati io e Antonella.
E Roberto e Stefano erano nati
in Inghilterra?
In Inghilterra, a Hampshire.
E puoi vedere le varie case dei pescatori, puoi vedere la torre campanaria, la torre del comune, la puoi vedere là, che spunta fra le... Ora ti porto a vedere una delle case più antiche di Piombino, del 1200.
Ok.
Dobbiamo andare, poi sono le 1, dobbiamo andare verso casa perché loro vogliono mangiare alle 1:30.
Ok.
Vedi? Opera di Andrea Di Francesco Guardi e della sua bottega. È del decennio del 1430, lo stile rinascimentale con influenze gotiche. La cisterna, che anche questa del Guardi, datata del 1468, ha in bassorilievo i busti di Jacopo III a Piani, signore di Piombino, di sua moglie, Battistina di Campofregoso, del figlio futuro Jacopo IV e la stemma di famiglia. Una tradizione non confermata dai riscontri storici attribuisce di questi altri esistenti in città il volere di Cesare Borgia, duca di Valentino, che occupò Piombino dal 1501 al 1503. Cesare Borgia è molto conosciuto, ma non era, penso, ecco, guarda che bello, puoi vedere i particolari della scultura del Guardi, tutto attorno alla porta. Vedi? The details?
Mm-hmm.
Ecco qua, e quindi qui puoi vedere Battistina di Campofregoso, puoi vedere Jacopo, il figlio, e tutti gli appiani. E vedi, questi sono i dettagli particolari dei progetti che si sono nel museo. Museo archeologico. Sono superlettili, anfore, resti che sono stati trovati a Populonia, per gran parte, sia nella necropoli che nell'Acropoli. E ecco, qui è finita la cittadella. E qua una volta c'era la casa della sorella di Napoleone, Elisa, che sposò Felice Baciocchi, chiamata quindi per questo la Baciocca.
Chi era Felipe Baciocchi?
Sarà stato un signore, anche
un signore, a squire.
Però lo squire italiano.
Da questo si vede bene Piombino,
Qui puoi vedere.
As much as I was enjoying the tour of Piombino, I felt as though it was only a surface-level documentation of the town. This spoke to deeper problems that I was having with the documentary and trying to capture Piombino. In some ways I'd failed. I'd been unable to get under the skin of the town. What I'd filmed so far was passion without flesh, love without climax. On the one hand, I felt I only had myself to blame. The film was yet another one of my own shortcomings. But then again, perhaps I wasn't all to blame. After all, the environment I was working in barely had a pulse at times, and the subjects of the film were consistently hostile and rude towards me.
Fuck off! I told him not to film it 1,000 times, he still does it.
The whole thing had become completely antithetical to the vitality and inspiration I was in search of.
He does a movie advert on YouTube.
Mm.
Do you want the soundtrack and stuff?
Jimmy, qual è la tua?
Either way, whether it was my own fault or not, I felt defeated, and when it came to the film, my doubts had mounted to the point that I'd completely given up hope. I'd taken things too far, maybe. One thing's for sure, I'd certainly succeeded in accelerating my father's physical decline.
Exactly, this is what I mean.
All in all, I thought the vision could never be realised. The project would never see the light of day. The dream was over.
Fremd bin ich eingezogen, fremd zieh ich wieder aus. Der Mai war mir gewogen mit manchem Blumenstrauß. Das Mädchen sprach von Liebe.
Buonasera a voi, buonasera al nostro personaggio di oggi che è Fabio Canessa, insegna italiano e latino al liceo Carducci di Piombino, ma è anche giornalista, critico letterario e cinematografico, scrittore di Piombino, anche se ama molto viaggiare, è vero questo sicuramente, e aprirsi gli orizzonti. Lavora di notte quando diventa più creativo, traduce i classici, ascolta tanta musica e legge molto. Lo contraddistinguono i riccioli da sempre?
Sì, da tantissimo perché...
Fabio Canessa, the man being interviewed, is Piombino's premier film critic and man about town. Incidentally, he is also a good family friend of my mother's, and I've known him since quite a young age. These are some photos of the year him and his family came to visit us in London. In the midst of my earlier despair, I'd completely forgotten that I'd arranged an interview with Fabio only later that evening.
Cattolino.
At this point in the film, I figured we should look to the culture at large if we were to understand Piombino and its history. And so, I thought it was only right that I sit down with Canessa to discuss La Bella Vita, the most famous film to be set in Piombino. But first, I'll give you a quick bit of background. Paolo Virzi is a noted Italian filmmaker from the nearby town of Livorno. Piombino is in the province of Livorno. Virzi's first film, La Bella Vita, which was his career breakthrough at Venice in 1994, is set in the Piombino of the late 1980s and depicts the town's industrial decline.
Ma con la ritmo poteva prestare la colpa del turatello. Mi serviva, muovetevi, dai! Solita figura da morti di fame.
Tutto very good. Ok, benissimo, benissimo. Poi si aspetta, provo un pochino. Tom, tom, tom. Vai. Allora, sì, che pensavi del modo in cui Virzi ha... how you say portrayed in Italian? Ha fatto vedere Piombino,
No.
Era reale, era tipo...
Sì, dunque Paolo Virzi intanto ha girato esattamente qui, nel senso che la prima scena del primo film di Virzi, cioè La Bella Vita, è stata girata esattamente qui sotto, via Ferruccio, e la prima scena loro vanno a sposarsi qui in comune a Piombino, e nella prima scena passano esattamente di fronte a casa mia, cioè di fronte al portone di casa mia. Quindi il cinema di Virzi comincia da casa mia, nel cuore di Piombino e dal mio portone di casa. E poi era un film straordinario perché riusciva all'epoca a cogliere non solo il ritratto dell'italiano e di Piombino in generale, ma anche l'Italia che sarebbe arrivata dopo. Il film raccontava la storia d'amore fra una cassiera della Coop e sposata con un operaio di Piombino. Lei invece si innamorava di un cialtrone che faceva la TV privata.
Per una volta, ecco, io non lo so, vorrei dire anche... ecco, mi sono emozionato perché succede anche...
E lui faceva vedere come questo personaggio, insomma, l'imbonitore della televisione privata, che era Massimo Ghini, insomma assomigliava un po' per certi aspetti al Berlusconi che sarebbe arrivato, cioè al fatto che la donna del popolo era affascinata da questo personaggio un po' pop, un po' televisivo, ed era diciamo un modo per far rinascere al meglio la commedia all'italiana, quella di Monicelli, di Risi, di Scola. Paolo Virzì è stato davvero il miglior erede di loro e ha anche colto la Piombino che si stava trasformando, cioè gli operai che entravano in crisi, la fabbrica, nel film un operaio si suicida, e anche la vocazione turistica piombinese. Il film finisce
con loro che aprono,
che vogliono aprire uno stabilimento balneare a quello che oggi è Carlappiano, più o meno Mortelliccio, quella parte là, insomma, la costa est. La bella vita è stato un film fortunato che ha cominciato una grande carriera di Virzì, che è uno dei pochi registi davvero su cui si può fare sempre affidamento del nostro cinema, che ha continuato la tradizione del grande cinema italiano, ma ha saputo anche rinnovarla e ha fotografato benissimo, con quel tono agrodolce che era tipico dei grandi registi di un tempo, per esempio Antonio Pietrangeli. Ha fotografato bene la Piombino com'era e come sarebbe diventata, l'Italia com'era e come sarebbe diventata, e in un film che è divertente ma che è anche molto intelligente, molto serio, quindi è stato fondamentale per me.
Sublime. The interview with Fabio topped off what was an all-round rather congenial rencontre with the old boy. I'm ashamed to admit it, but for the bulk of my childhood in Piombino, before I'd read any of Dante's cantos or watched any of Pasolini's great films, I'd taken a much keener interest in Estate, Pista Palline and Fiorentina Football Club.
Toni! 2-0! Si è svegliato Toni! È arrivato Toni!
All this meant that my meeting with Fabio marked our first real opportunity to discuss the great Italian cinema together. It's fair to say we went off on one and took off on a major intellectual tangent of sorts. Within minutes he had Luciano Tovoli on the phone, Luciano being one of Italy's most accomplished cinematographers and also a Piombino native, probably most well known for his work on Suspiria and The Passenger.
Vabbè. Sì, quando vieni in zona chiamami, che ci vediamo volentieri. Ciao Letizia, come stai?
Back on the domestic front, the growing resistance from my family had forced me to devise increasingly ingenious surveillance methods, the latest of which involved slipping my phone into the breast pocket of my shirt, as so. This enabled me to film my subjects naturally without them knowing that they were being filmed.
Oh shit, it actually works.
Target number 1 was Angry Dad. Don't touch it, don't touch it. I'm gonna say hi to Dunks. How you doing? Sounds good to me, mate. Yeah. I will. What was that?
What? Get! Oh! What the fuck? We're recording. Where's your phone? Turn it off. Turn it off. Turn it off.
I'm not recording anything. Oh! My mother and brother were equally amused as I was, but the fun and games didn't end there.
Come l'ha chiamata la real life?
Questo l'ho detto nel corso, non so. Qualche parola ho dovuto improvvisare. Increasingly ingenious techniques surveillance. Wait, you don't have to hit me, I'm burnt. I'm sunburnt.
Can't take a video of you sniffing my balls.
I'm not going to take a video of you sniffing. I didn't know you sniffed your balls, mate. Didn't know you did such a thing.
Fuck off.
Okay, I'll put it on.
Whatsappato.
It's off. It's off. I just keep my phone there, mate.
Una fitta biscottata.
Bah, vuoi che te lo prendo?
Let me see.
Dude, I wouldn't be getting Fette Biscottata out the thing if my camera was on. It's not very good footage.
You're not going to put it on the net anyway, are you?
No.
Questa è la nostra autorizzazione, non lo puoi fare.
Yeah, that's illegal. You get sent to court, don't you? You get sent to prison.
Questa è un pugno di miele, la vuoi?
It's all wet here. What do you want?
Forse si dovrebbero mantenere meglio.
Little wormy woo.
Lo
What do you
vuoi?
want? What? I was terrorizing the household with my mesmerizing new method. The novel breast pocket slip technique had caused the situation to escalate into full-blown domestic warfare, and my parents had begun to devise some of their own counter-strategies, starting with the suggestion that we go for a drive to the old steel plant, which was undoubtedly just an excuse to get me out of the house and keep me from aggravating everyone else.
Magona. Yes.
Isn't that my area?
Ecco, here could you go up?
On the right? Up there?
It is not open. Sì, you have to
It's a dead end. Can I go up there?
Yeah.
Do you want me?
Sì.
Up here? Can I turn around and come back?
Sì, spero. E questa è una torta, vedi dove è girata? Virzì. E da qui, da su in cima, potrai vedere le acciaierie.
Keep going. Oh shit, we can't. No, you've got me now. I've got. Oh, Jesus, bollocks, fuck, shit. What have you done? We should have gone round there.
E allora torniamo indietro.
Shall I jump out? The impromptu trip to the steelworks does, however, bring us back to an important feature in Piombino's history. Much like earlier with my grandmother, I have once again withheld certain key information to create a false impression and slightly mislead my audience. You see, there is one key reason why for most Italians, Piombino is maybe not the first place they'd think to go on holiday, and that's because making up approximately 2/3 of the town is a giant abandoned steel plant. I didn't want to tell you guys this because I've been trying to vouch for Piombino, of course, and promote its transition from an industrial town to a brand new beach resort, something that the town's mayor Francesco insisted on personally before filming commenced. But anyway, here we are now. I've spilt the beans. There's simply no escaping it. The history of Piombino is inextricably linked to its steelworks and always will be. For over 100 years, the acciaieria was the booming heart of the town, a dizzying maze of conveyor belts, burning furnaces and towering ovens. Almost all the men in the town would have worked there, just as my grandfather and great-grandfather did. Its history is a long and complex one, involving workers' rights, world wars and world trade that would take a lifetime to tell. They were the second largest steelworks in all of Italy, which is a major feat for a small town like Piombino. Back in Ealing, I asked my mum what she remembered of the acciaieria in its heyday. Che ti ricordi dell'acciaieria?
Allora mi ricordo le sirene. Che praticamente scandivano il giorno con i turni della mattina delle 6, quindi c'era la sirena delle 6, la sirena delle 2 e la sirena delle 10, che erano i 3 turni degli operai, mattina, pomeriggio e notte.
E com'era nonno Ilio quando ritornava ad un giorno di lavoro?
Dunque, allora me lo ricordo quando io facevo le elementari ancora, perché quando lui lavorava io facevo le elementari, poi andò in pensione, che io ero ancora, stavo andando alle medie, alle scuole medie, però mi ricordo le elementari quando tornava alle 10 dal lavoro era tutto nero.
Ah, davvero? Doveva fare una doccia?
Doveva
Faceva una
lavarsi,
doccia?
fare il bagno, sì. perché era tutto sporco, un viso di fuliggine, perché lui lavorava dentro l'acciaieria e chi tornava dal lavoro era sempre così, tornava in bicicletta.
Ah, e com'era di umore una volta che arrivava?
Era contento di vedermi, che l'aspettavo, però mi disse: ma tu devi andare a dormire, perché a quest'ora le bambine dormono. Però io gli volevo tanto bene che l'aspettavo sempre quando tornava.
Well, I think it's time we introduce the man in question, the kingpin, Nonno Elio. Elio Vignali, soldier, labourer, family man, part-time chap, full-time geezer. And, also importantly, a key cog in this Piombino documentary. Well, you'll remember back to the young family, the great-grandparents Michele and Francesca, who'd just moved from the countryside to Piombino in the early 1900s. Elio was born shortly after they arrived there. 100 years later, my mum and I went to visit the street where he was born and the house where he grew up. Ah, non sai dove era nato?
Ma non esattamente, la via è questa.
Questa via, dove siamo ora?
Sì.
Ok, allora Elio era nato everywhere.
In questa via. Bisognerebbe trovare al comune.
Allora non era nato in un ospedale?
No, ma lo sai che all'ospedale ci nascevano soltanto dagli anni 59, 50, 60? Perché prima
E invece la casa dove è vissuta è qui?
Ora ti faccio vedere, è vicina,
E lui parlava mai della sua infanzia, nonno Elio? Che diceva? Come?
Poi andava spesso a Castelnuovo a trovare i suoi nonni, andava a aiutare i cugini nell'agricoltura, avevano non so, case in campagna e quindi lui andava nell'estate ad aiutare. E vedi, questa è la casa, quella con il balcone.
È lo stesso edificio o hanno cambiato?
No, è uguale.
È uguale.
Più o meno uguale. Solo che dentro, cioè lui abitava nel cortile, c'è un cortile,
Courtyard.
E la sua casa era dentro.
Ah, però ora non c'è più.
C'è ancora.
Ah,
ma non so come arrivarci, bisognerebbe suonare.
E chiedere. Ma lui si sentiva piombinese o Castelnuovo? Piombinese?
Poi alla fine non ci andava tanto.
Non ci andava tanto.
Certo, si sentiva più piombinese che castelnovese. E qui abitava anche la zia Perla, la sorella.
Abitavano tutti insieme, Michele e Perla?
In un altro appartamento sempre di questo palazzo.
Ok. Aspetta che aspettiamo qui un secondo. Wow. Sai mica qual è? Che finestra?
Che zia Perla non lo so.
Che appartamento è? No, ma Elio.
Elio all'interno non si vede.
Non si vede da qui. Ma tanto siamo abbastanza vicini.
Ora poi ti racconto.
Racconta.
Perché c'è un'altra casa di questa cugina, costruita nel 1911, che fu costruita da un cugino del nonno, che aveva partecipato molto all'edificazione di Piombino negli anni 20, anni 30, la scuola elementare, l'istituto tecnico industriale. Una casa che è questa, ti faccio vedere.
How many nukes do Iran have?
You're filming me, fuck up.
I'm not filming. How many nukes do Iran have? I'm not.
You absolutely are.
How many nukes do Iran have? Come on, let's just have a chat, mate. Cheb's quick. Edge show us your Chebs. Oh. Joe, how many nukes do Iran have?
Fuck off.
The final chapter of Piombino is dedicated to telling the final turn in the family history that brought the two great nations of Italy and England together. It was the summer of 1951. Irio Vignali is, at the time, a shy 37-year-old bachelor approaching middle age. Having spent his best years in the army, he has yet to meet the love of his life, and sometimes wonders if he ever will. Millicent Edith Blake is 7 years younger. From Dorking in Surrey, she is holidaying with some friends at the Club Med in Baratti, a picturesque bay near Piombino. In the late afternoon of the 24th of August, Irio takes a trip out to the Baratti beach. Although we as a family like to think that Irio and Millie's meeting was a matter of fate, a chance happening, in my opinion it is possible that Irio made the trip out to Baratti with the sole and specific intention to pick up women. But I guess we can't say for certain. Either way, by this point they're both at the beach. Neptune grass, Posidonia oceanica, is a type of seagrass endemic to the Mediterranean. Its fruits are these strange brown furballs that get washed up along the shores of beaches all around Piombino. If you've never seen them before, it isn't immediately obvious what they are, and they're a confusing sight to behold. And so, back on the beach, Irio is moping about in his swimming costume, when Millicent Edith Blake, the young English woman, whom he has never met or spoken to before, asks him what on earth these furballs are, and where they've come from. Irio politely explains that they are known as olives of the sea, and are the fruits of Neptune grass. And that was how they met, and how it all began for the Vignali family. I suppose I have that spontaneous conversation on the beach to thank for my cherished memories of Piombino. Spending the summer months there always meant a lot to me, and I still feel very attached to the place and my family there.
La puoi misurare?
Ah, sei grande.
Scusa, ma queste cose poi si possono sviluppare?
Non lo so.
Sviluppare queste foto. Te ce le fai?
Te ci fai le foto, ma poi se le devi fare avere.
Dicendo che le cambia, no, se le cambia.
Nella notte in questura è crollata ancora con una denuncia che delibero
La foto è veramente
di immigrazione clandestina e
l'immagine si blocca per poi
Vai.
ferma l'immagine.
Ovviamente ci sono modo per poi... Oh, wow, cockles and mussels.
Sì, come fa?
Dublin, fair city, where the girls are so pretty. Does here that first met my sweet Molly Malone. She wheeled her wheelbarrow through streets broad and narrow, crying cockles and mussels, alive, alive, oh.
Bravi!
Ale! E poi invece c'è quella che fa I belong to Glasgow, come fa quella lì?
I don't really know that one. There used to be an old Scotch singer that used to sing that. When I get to trouble, on a Saturday, Glasgow belongs to me. It's some old man that always gets drunk on a Saturday night. They do drink far too much up there. Whiskey.
E poi quali conosci di canzoni? E poi quali conosci?
What, the one when I...
You'll notice from the audio that Nonna Millie only replies in English, and as a general rule, she stayed oblivious to all things Italian. She once met the President of Italy, spoke to him for 5 minutes, then afterwards turned to her husband and said, "Who was that man?"
E poi c'è quella The Man on the Flying Trapeze.
He flies through the air with the greatest of ease, that daring young man on the flying trapeze. Da 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 da. The man on the flying trapeze. But it's terribly old, that's why I've forgotten it.
As we know, all good things must pass, and in 2000, Irio Vignali died as an old man in a hospital in Piombino, only a few years after I was born. Millicent Edith Blake died 14 years later. It is odd to think that when Nonna Millie was born in 1921 in Dorking, that she would end up in a far-off place like this, in a marble tomb above a family of Italians.
Puoi andare a vedere altre persone, poi Civilini, ci sono tante persone importanti di Piombino, famiglie importanti. Vedi Bartolini, Guadagnini, quel palazzo giallo.
But Irio and Millie's legacy lives on, with every summer spent as a family in Piombino and each evening spent in one another's company. It's all really rather congenial.
Rispetto agli altri anni? Io lo siamo messi. No, ma questo verranno loro.
Ma mettono nel congelatore, ma...
Va bene, che vita fa? Ne hai visto?
No, si porta dopo la seconda mandata.
No, ma bevete voi.
Oggi c'era una bella farfalla. No, oggi c'era la farfalla.
La farfalla?
O ieri. Una farfallona mentre sarà in pineta.
Ideali casa, sai?
Come il vino.
Ci lavorano tutte e due figlioli.
Certo. Now, to end this film, I could go into some wanky justification of why I made it and how it stands as a piece of memoiristic filmmaking or what it means for Anglo-Italian relations, but I'll spare you all of this and tell you the truth. The truth is, I made this film because I love my family. And yes, I even love Piombino.
We making this? Yes. Disaster.
Love to scold her, love to love her like I do. Ooh, little Chewy, don't know what you're doing to me, but you're doing to me what I want you to. Oh, Chewy. Oh, Chewy, 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 baby. Every time you love me, it's a real sugar treat. Chewy, 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 baby. Love me, little Chewy, 'cause you do it so sweet. Oh, I love to kiss her, love to hold her, love to miss her, love to scold her, love to love her like I do. Ooh, little Chewy, don't know what you're doing to me, but you're doing to me what I want you to.